this question of the relationship of faith to reason is one that one comes up against all the time. And the question is often put as if faith and reason were opposed. That, to my mind, is nonsense. It's coupled with an impression that people get that faith is something that occurs only in religious situations and therefore isn't worth talking about. Richard Dawkins talks about faith heads, or roughly equivalent to cloth heads, I suppose, and that reason is associated with science and therefore we take it seriously. Well, that is to make an error in both directions. Firstly, faith and reason walk hand in hand in both science and theology, so that we need to unpack this just a little bit. Faith, of course, our English word comes from the Latin word fides, which means trust. And in its normal usage, faith, reason, and evidence are words that belong very much together. If I go into my bank manager with a project of making money, the issue for the bank manager is, can he place his faith in me? Can he trust me? Of course, in these days of financial crises, the problem might be the other way round. Can I trust the bank manager? But leaving that aside, can he trust me? Now, he will want reasons to trust me. He wants evidence on which to base his faith in me. And he will ask me a whole series of very penetrating questions in order to see whether his faith is justified. And that applies right across the board. When we say we have faith in something, we trust it, we believe in it, the next logical question is, what reasons have you got? What evidence have you got for believing it? So if I say God is the creator of the universe, you are perfectly justified in saying, what reasons have you got? So that we need to distinguish faith from blind faith. What makes this discussion very complex is that many of the new atheists regard all faith as blind faith. But that is absolute nonsense. A man's faith in his wife is not blind. I even discussed this with Richard Dawkins, and he quite rightly gave me many reasons why he has faith in his wife. That is, we immediately see that that kind of faith can have reasons. It is evidence-based faith, but it is nonetheless faith. So that to say that all faith is blind faith is simply wrong in using faith in its general context, but it's also wrong using faith in its specifically religious context. The early scientists and many contemporary scientists weren't fools in putting their faith in God because they believed there was evidence for it. And it's interesting that in the part of the New Testament that is devoted to explaining what faith is, one of the major books, that is the book we call the Gospel by the Apostle John, he says that he has written, collected together all this evidence, and I quote, "These things are written that you might believe," that is, have faith in, "that you might believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that believing you might have life in his name." In other words, John is not asking us to put blind faith in Jesus. It's the exact opposite. He said, here's the evidence I've collected as an eyewitness, and this evidence forms the basis on which you can rest your faith. That is, he is appealing for evidence-based faith. It is, of course, the fact there is such a thing as blind faith, and it's very dangerous, particularly when it's coupled with unscrupulous religious authority, as we see in 9/11, the blind faith of those that drove the airliners into the Twin Towers in New York. That is blind faith, and it is to be roundly condemned. And I will agree entirely with the new atheists in condemning it, but I will not agree with them that that is the only kind of faith there is, because after all, some of them at least are scientists, like Dawkins and Dennett, for instance. So they have faith in common with every other scientist who ever lived in the rational intelligibility of the universe. Their science doesn't give them that. As my teacher of quantum physics at Cambridge points out in many of his books, Sir John Polkinghorne, physics is powerless, he says, to explain its faith in the rational intelligibility of the universe. Why is that? Because in order to do any physics, you must believe in the rational intelligibility of the universe. Now, here comes the major irony. The atheists claim they don't have faith. Oh, yes, they do, in their science, in the rational intelligibility of the universe. But half a minute, where's the evidence that that faith is justified? In their worldview, it doesn't exist, because their worldview is that human intelligence is simply the product of a mindless, unguided process. But if that's the case, why on earth would you give it any credence whatsoever? Why would you believe any thing that it produced? As John Gray has pointed out not so long ago, and he has said that, you know, the interesting thing about the evolutionary doctrines that these new atheists base so much of their worldview on is that they are geared to survivability, not towards truth. So why would you believe anything produced by an apparatus that is thrown up by such a mindless, unguided process? What am I saying? I'm saying, firstly, there is such a thing as blind faith. It is very dangerous in the religious sphere, but it seems to me that the atheists are coming very near to being guilty of blind faith when they trust the human mind for which they haven't a shred of evidence on their own hypotheses, in their own worldview, that it should be considered as reliable. In other words, scientists have to have faith in the rational intelligibility of the universe. The rational justification of that faith came originally from Christianity. Atheism simply doesn't have any. So this matter of faith, evidence and reason is something we need to think about very carefully. There is a final point to be made here, actually, and that is to bring in the word revelation. Sometimes faith and revelation are put as opposites, as diametrically opposite to revelation. But let's think of revelation firstly at the simple human level. Here's Aunt Matilda and she's baked a cake. Scientific analysis cannot tell you why she made the cake. You'll never find out unless she reveals it to you. But if she reveals it to you, that doesn't mean you shut off your reason. Indeed, you'll have to use your reason to understand the content of her revelation. That's absolutely obvious. And you can check by using your reason whether what she reveals to you made sense. If she says she made it for her son Jim, and you know she's a son Jim, then that makes perfect sense. At the higher level, it's exactly the same as this. The Bible claims to be revelation. Now, I believe that that is the case, but an atheist reading it doesn't have to start by believing that. They simply read it as data. And any data requires reason to even understand it. I have never yet met anybody, Christian or not, who can read the Bible without using their reason. So to say that reason and revelation are opposed is to make a fundamental category mistake. The issue is simply this. We get data from nature. We use our reason from that. The Bible claims to be a revelation of God. It claims to be God speaking. We use our reason on that. What is being claimed, though, is that there is certain information in Scripture that unaided human reason could not on its own gain. But what we are certainly not saying is that that revelation is against reason. Of course, it's nonsense. It proceeds from the source of all reason, God himself.